My hands were still steady when I heard my mother-in-law laughing in my own hotel lobby. The sound was sharp and loud, cutting through the peaceful music that usually played in the Mercer Grand. "We always book the presidential suite," Diane said, making sure nearby guests could hear every word. Anything less would be absolutely embarrassing for people of our social standing. She adjusted her expensive silk scarf and looked around with a smug expression. "My father-in-law, Richard," added with a proud grin. "Some people work at hotels, Sloan. Others stay in them." He looked at me with pity, as if I was a lost puppy. They didn't know I was standing behind the reception desk in a simple navy blazer for a reason. I was watching them mock the very building I had built from the ground up with my own sweat and tears. My husband, Caleb, stood beside them, avoiding my eyes completely. He looked at the floor, refusing to speak up for me. Then Diane leaned closer to a guest and whispered, "My son married someone sweet. Not exactly successful, but she is a sweet girl." A small laugh spread through the lobby. I felt that familiar sting, but I stayed quiet. Then, a loud crash echoed from upstairs. The sound was like a thunderclap right inside the building. Suddenly, guests began to scream, and the peaceful atmosphere of the lobby vanished into thin air. I looked up and saw water starting to pour from the ceiling right near the entrance to the presidential suite. Panic erupted instantly as people scrambled to get away from the falling debris and the sudden flood. Security guards rushed past me, their radios buzzing with urgent messages. I didn't scream and I didn't run. Instead, I calmly reached under the mahogany counter and opened the heavy leather incident report binder. I pulled out a fresh form and grabbed my favorite pen. I already knew one thing that nobody else in the room realized. I was the only person in this massive building who could officially sign off on what happened next. My in-laws were still shouting and pointing at the ceiling, looking for someone to blame for the mess they had caused. They had no idea that their perfect vacation was about to turn into a legal nightmare. I watched them through the security monitors for a second before stepping out from behind the desk. Tonight, the secrets would end. I was going to sign that report with a very calm hand. I arrived upstairs to find absolute chaos in the hallway. The presidential suite was flooding rapidly because the water was gushing out from under the heavy double doors. It turned out that Diane had forced open a decorative water feature inside the room just to take better photos for her social media page. She wanted the perfect background, and in her greed, she had broken the internal pressure valves. Now, luxury furniture that cost thousands of dollars was soaked through. Guests in the rooms below were furious, and my staff members were panicking because they didn't know how to stop the flow. Diane immediately saw a housekeeping girl and started pointing her finger. "This is gross negligence," she snapped, her voice hitting a high pitch. "I pay too much money to stay in a place that falls apart like this. I will have you fired by tomorrow morning." She didn't notice me standing in the corner with my clipboard. I didn't react to her insults or her yelling. I simply started documenting everything I saw. I wrote down the time, the location, and the specific damage to the Persian rugs. I knew exactly how liability worked in a $2 billion hospitality chain because I wrote the rules. Diane had just made a very expensive mistake. The general manager, a tall man named Mr. Brooks, arrived a few minutes later. He looked at the mess and then saw me standing there. He walked past Diane and Richard, ignoring their loud complaints. He leaned in and asked me quietly, "Sloan, how bad is the damage? Do we need to shut down the entire floor?" That was the moment when I felt the air in the room change. The power shifted instantly. Diane heard him say my name, and she froze mid-sentence. She had been in the middle of another rant about the incompetent staff, but now she looked confused. "Wait," she whispered, her eyes darting between me and the manager. "Why is he asking you for advice? You just work at the front desk." I finally looked her right in the eyes, showing no fear and no anger. I stood up straight and pulled my blazer tight. "I sign off on every single incident report in this hotel, Diane," I said firmly. Her face drained of all color until she looked like she might faint. Caleb finally looked at me like he was seeing me for the very first time. He looked shocked, confused, and a little bit afraid. The silence in the hallway was louder than the splashing water. They were finally starting to realize something was wrong. I turned the clipboard around so they could see the document I was working on. I pointed to the bottom of the page where the authorization line was located. It was clearly printed, Sloan Mercer, founder and CEO, Mercer Hospitality Group. The silence stayed for a long time as they read the words over and over again. Diane let out a nervous laugh that sounded more like a choke. "That's not possible," she stammered. "You told us you had a small job in the city. You're just a regular girl." I didn't argue with her. I just clicked my pen and signed the incident report right in front of her face. My signature was bold and clear. It was a professional act, but it felt like a final ending to the lies they had told about me for years. I was calm, professional, and completely in control of the situation. Richard tried to step forward to say something, but Mr. Brooks stepped in the way. "Please step back, sir," the manager said. "The CEO is busy assessing the liability for the damages you caused to our property." The look on Richard's face was priceless. He realized that the people who stay in hotels were now in debt to the person who works in them. It was final. By the next morning, my phone was absolutely flooded with notifications and messages. My mother-in-law was already busy posting online, trying to save her reputation. She called the entire incident a huge misunderstanding and blamed the hotel's plumbing for the disaster. She didn't realize that we had high-definition security footage of her prying the fountain apart with a metal shoehorn. She was lying to the world, but the truth was already locked in my office safe. Caleb finally sent me a text message that afternoon. It was only one line, but it hurt more than I expected. "You should have told them the truth a long time ago," he wrote. I stared at that line on my screen for much longer than I should have. It made me feel a deep wound in my heart. The real pain wasn't the insults Diane had thrown at me over the years. It was the fact that my own husband had made the same assumption as his parents. He truly believed I was nothing until he saw my name on a corporate document. He didn't value me for who I was. He only cared once he knew I had power. That realization felt like a heavy weight in my chest as I sat in my quiet office. People always assume they know my story. They think I just work in hotels because I like to be on the ground floor. They don't know that I actually own them. I own all of them. I built Mercer Hospitality from a single, struggling boutique property into a massive global brand with hundreds of locations. I started with nothing but a small loan and a lot of ambition. I worked 18-hour days for years to make this dream come true. But I stayed out of the spotlight on purpose. I never put my face on the brochures or did interviews with big magazines. I felt that peace mattered much more to me than public recognition. I liked the idea that I could walk through my own lobbies without being bothered by cameras or fake people. I wanted to see how my staff treated guests when they didn't think the boss was watching. It gave me a true look at my business. At least, that is how I used to feel. Now, I realized that my silence had given people like Diane the chance to treat me like trash. By trying to protect my peace, I had accidentally invited people to disrespect me. That was a mistake I wouldn't make again. Diane didn't apologize after the truth came out. That wasn't her style. Instead, she started investigating me like I was some kind of stranger she had never met. She spent hours on her laptop, digging into my past and my bank accounts. She was looking for a flaw or a reason to say I didn't deserve my success. But the more she found, the worse the situation got for her. She discovered that I wasn't just a figurehead. I was a respected leader in the industry. She found out that my employees truly respected me because I took care of them. She saw that top executives from around the world deferred to my decisions. And what was even worse for her ego was the realization that Caleb knew more than he had admitted to her. He had seen the luxury cars and the expensive jewelry I kept in the back of my closet, but he had chosen to stay silent to keep the peace with his mother. Diane felt betrayed by her own son. She realized she was the only one who was completely in the dark. Her investigation didn't give her weapons to use against me. It only showed her how small she really was in my world. The situation took a turn when a hotel employee leaked the security footage of the incident. I didn't authorize it, but in the world of social media, things happen fast. The video went viral within a few hours. It showed Diane trying to enhance the suite's fountain while Richard cheered her on. It showed the moment the pipe burst and the water started spraying everywhere. It showed them running around like children while the guests downstairs screamed in terror. The internet picked a side instantly, and it definitely was not Diane's side. People started making memes of her influencer pose right before the water hit her. Then, someone found a photo of the incident report with my signature on it. The story of the secret CEO versus the entitled in-laws became the biggest news of the week. Thousands of people were commenting on how cool I looked in the video, standing there calmly with my clipboard while the world fell apart around me. Diane was being dragged online by everyone from teenagers to news anchors. The same social media fame she had always wanted was now being used to destroy her. She was finally getting the attention she deserved, but she hated every second of it. Caleb finally came to my office to confront me privately. He looked tired, and his eyes were red. He sat down in the chair across from my desk and sighed. "I didn't think you were this powerful, Sloane," he said quietly. He looked around at my large office and the awards on the walls. He acted like he was visiting a museum instead of his wife's workplace. It was a strange feeling to see him so out of place in my world. I looked at him across the desk. I didn't feel angry anymore. I just felt disappointed. "That is the whole problem, Caleb," I replied. "You never asked me what I did. You never bothered to learn about my dreams or my hard work. You just listened to your mother when she said I was nothing." He tried to argue, saying he was just trying to keep his parents happy, but I shook my head. I told him that a partnership requires honesty and interest. He had treated my life like a hobby instead of a career. For the first time, he saw how his silence had hurt me just as much as his mother's insults. He realized that by not standing up for me, he had been part of the problem all along. The next day, I walked into a high-level board meeting at the corporate headquarters. Usually, I would stay quiet and listen, but today was different. As I entered the room, every single person stood up. No one interrupted me when I started speaking. No one made little jokes or tried to explain things to me like I was a child. They just listened with total focus. They finally knew exactly who I was and what I controlled. I laid out a new plan for the company, focusing on stricter rules for guest behavior in our premium suites. I made it clear that no one, regardless of their last name, was above the rules of Mercer hospitality. My voice was steady and strong. I felt a new sense of power that I had been hiding for far too long. The board members nodded in agreement, eager to follow my lead. I realized that by stepping into my role publicly, I was making the company stronger. I wasn't just a founder in a navy blazer anymore. I was a CEO who was ready to lead her empire into the future. The era of hiding was officially over. I felt a surge of confidence that I should have embraced years ago. Diane was losing control of her life. She tried to post a public apology on her page, but it sounded more like a defense of her actions. She claimed she was just trying to appreciate the art of the fountain. It backfired instantly. The comments section was flooded with people calling her entitled and spoiled. Even the guests she had tried to impress in the lobby were now dragging her name through the mud online. She was becoming a joke. Caleb started to pull away from his parents for the first time in his life. He stopped answering Diane's frantic phone calls and refused to go over for dinner. He was starting to see his parents for who they really were. He saw how they treated waitresses, drivers, and especially me. He didn't like what he saw when he took off his rose-colored glasses. He realized that his mother's pride was actually just a lack of respect for everyone else. This was the first real crack in their family dynamic. Diane was losing her son, and she was losing her social standing. She was terrified of being alone, but her own actions were pushing everyone away. I watched it happen from a distance, feeling a mix of sadness and relief. The truth was finally doing its work. While things were falling apart for Diane, I was quietly reviewing the financial side of the incident. Something strange caught my eye. The damage estimate from the plumbing company didn't match the numbers in the official internal report. Someone had altered the figures to make the repair costs look much lower than it actually was. I sat at my desk, looking at the two different documents. This was no longer just a bit of family drama. I realized that this was internal fraud. Someone in my own company was trying to protect my in-laws by hiding the true cost of their mistake. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. I had built this company on honesty and hard work, and now someone was using my name to cover up a crime. I spent the rest of the night digging through emails and digital files. I needed to find out who was responsible before the board found out. If I didn't handle this correctly, it could destroy the reputation of Mercer Hospitality. This was a test of my leadership. I had to decide if I was going to be a sweet daughter-in-law or a CEO who protected her company at all costs. The stakes had never been higher. My legal team met with me the next morning. They had the full file on the fraud. They found out that a junior manager had been bribed by Richard to change the numbers. They had proof of the bank transfer and the edited documents. My lead lawyer asked me one simple question. Sloan, do you want to escalate this to the police? We have enough to put them both in serious legal trouble. I looked at the file on my desk. I knew that I could destroy everything they had. I could send Richard to jail and ruin Diane's life forever. It would be the ultimate revenge for every insult they had ever thrown at me. I thought about all the times they called me unsuccessful or sweet but simple. I had the power to end their story right here. But I didn't say yes. Not yet. I wanted to see if they would come to me and tell the truth first. I wanted to give them one last chance to be honest people. I told my legal team to wait. I wasn't being weak. I was being strategic. I wanted them to know that I held their lives in my hands before I made my final choice. I was playing a much bigger game now. A few days later, I received a gold-trimmed invitation in the mail. It was for a major hospitality awards gala in the city. The letter said I was being honored publicly for my contributions to the industry and my leadership in Mercer Hospitality. It was the biggest event of the year. Diane saw the announcement online before I even told her. She went completely silent for the first time since I met her. She saw my face on the event website, listed as the visionary of the year. She saw the ticket prices and the list of famous guests who would be there. She realized that I was moving in circles that she could only dream of entering. The silence from her was deafening. No more fake apologies, no more investigations, and no more insults. She was finally realizing that she had been bullying a giant. The gala was going to be my official coming out party to the world. Everyone would see me for who I really was. Diane knew that she wasn't invited, and that hurt her more than anything else. She was on the outside looking in, and it was a very lonely place to be. I started preparing my speech, knowing exactly what I wanted to say. Caleb made a big decision that week. He sat his parents down and told them he wouldn't be attending any family events for a while. He told them he needed space to think about his marriage and his future. He made it very clear that this wasn't because I asked him to. It was because of how they had acted. He was finally taking responsibility for his own life. That news hurt Diane and Richard more than any lawsuit ever could. They had spent their whole lives trying to control Caleb and make him into a version of themselves. Now he was walking away because he was ashamed of them. Diane cried for 3 days, but Caleb didn't budge. He stayed at a friend's house and focused on his work. For the first time, he was standing on his own 2 feet. I was proud of him, but I also felt a bit of distance between us. We still had a lot of healing to do. He had to earn my trust back, and that wouldn't happen overnight. But seeing him choose a side was a good start. He was finally seeing the world through my eyes, and he didn't like the view from his parents' side anymore. The night before the gala, I couldn't sleep. I paced around my living room, looking out at the city lights. I thought about the years I spent in silence. I thought about hiding my success because I was afraid of what people would think. I thought about how much it had cost me in the end. I had let people treat me poorly because I didn't want to cause a scene. I realized that my silence wasn't actually peace. It was just a place for other people to hide their own bad behavior. By being invisible, I had allowed my in-laws to believe their lies were true. I had allowed my husband to be lazy in our relationship. I had even allowed a manager to commit fraud in my name. I felt a deep sense of regret for not being more open from the beginning. Hiding hadn't protected me at all. It had just made me a target. I decided that from now on, I would live my life out loud. I would be proud of my success and my hard work. I wouldn't let anyone else tell my story for me. I felt a sense of clarity as the sun began to rise. Tomorrow was a new beginning. The gala was exactly the kind of event I used to dislike. There were flashing lights, hundreds of cameras, and too much attention. The room was filled with the most powerful people in the industry, all wearing expensive suits and diamonds. But I walked in anyway. I didn't hide in the back or try to blend in with the crowd. I wore a stunning emerald dress and walked with my head held high. I realized that hiding didn't protect me from anything. It just made me invisible to the wrong people. Tonight, I wanted everyone to see me. I wanted my staff to see their leader. I wanted my competitors to see their strongest rival. And I wanted to show myself that I could handle the spotlight. I moved through the room with confidence, shaking hands and talking about the future of hospitality. People were drawn to me, not just because of my title, but because of the energy I was putting out. I wasn't a sweet girl anymore. I was a force to be HR. The air in the room felt electric as I waited for my name to be called. I was ready to claim my place at the top. The music swelled, and the announcer stepped up to the microphone. And now, for our highest honor of the evening, he said. Please welcome the CEO and founder of Mercer Hospitality Group, Sloan Mercer. The applause filled the massive room, sounding like a wave of thunder. I walked onto the stage, the lights shining brightly on me. It felt like I was finally stepping into the sun after years of living in the shade. I looked out into the crowd and saw a sea of smiling faces. And then I saw her. Diane was standing in the back of the room. She had somehow managed to get a ticket, probably by using one of Richard's old business contacts. She was frozen in place, her eyes fixed on me. She looked small and out of place in such a grand setting. She wasn't the queen of the room anymore. She was just a spectator. I didn't feel angry when I saw her. I just felt a strange sense of peace. The truth was finally out in the open, and there was nothing she could do to change it. I took a deep breath and began my speech. My voice was clear and reached every corner of the room. As I spoke, I noticed people in the crowd turning to look at Diane. Someone must have recognized her from the viral video. Whispers started to spread through the back of the room. Diane realized something absolutely terrible in that moment. She realized that everyone here knew exactly who I was. They respected me. They admire my work. And they also knew exactly what she had done. She saw the pity in their eyes, and it crushed her. She had spent her life trying to be the most important person in every room. Now, she was in a room where she was the villain of the story. She realized that she didn't know the woman standing on that stage at all. She had judged me based on her own narrow ideas of success, and she had been completely wrong. The public realization was a heavy blow to her ego. She looked like she wanted to run away, but she was trapped by the crowd. She had to stand there and listen to the world cheer for the daughter-in-law she had tried to destroy. It was a moment of total clarity for her, and it was devastating. I finished my speech, and the room erupted in a standing ovation. I didn't use my speech to speak about her. I didn't mention the hotel incident or the flood. I didn't use my platform to expose her lies or make her look bad. I didn't need to do any of that. The truth was powerful enough to do the work on its own. I talked about the importance of integrity, hard work, and the people who make a business successful. I talked about my vision for the future of the company. I didn't feel the need to humiliate her in public. That would have made me just like her, and I was much better than that. My success was the only revenge I needed. By being a great leader and a successful woman, I was proving her wrong every single day. I could see the confusion on her face as I spoke. She probably expected me to attack her, but my kindness was even more confusing to her. I wanted to show her that my world was about building things up, not tearing people down. I stepped off the stage and felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I was finally free from the need to prove myself to anyone. I knew who I was, and that was enough. After the main event was over, the room moved into a smaller lounge for a private reception. I was surrounded by friends and colleagues, but I saw Caleb walking toward me through the crowd. He looked different tonight. He was wearing a dark suit, and he had a look of deep respect in his eyes. He waited until there was a break in the conversation to step forward. "I see it now, Sloan," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I should have seen it a long time ago. I'm so sorry for everything." He took my hand, and for the first time in months, it felt like he was really there with me. He wasn't hiding behind his parents or making excuses. He was just a man who was proud of his wife. "You are amazing," he added. I looked at him and saw the sincerity in his eyes. I realized that our relationship was going to be different from now on. We were going to be equals. He had a lot of work to do to make things right, but he was finally ready to try. I squeezed his hand and smiled. It was a small step, but it was a step in the right direction. As we were talking, I saw Diane trying to approach us. She looked nervous, and her hands were shaking. She stopped halfway across the room, watching us. For the first time since I had met her, she didn't have a sharp word or a proud comment ready. She didn't have a script to follow. She looked like she wanted to say something, but the words wouldn't come out. She saw the way Caleb was looking at me, and she knew she had lost her influence over him. She saw the way the people in the room treated me, and she knew she couldn't compete. She was a broken woman who had realized the cost of her own pride. I waited for her to speak, but she just stood there for a long moment before turning away. She couldn't face the truth yet. She wasn't ready to say the words, "I was wrong." But the silence was enough for me. It was the first time she had ever been quiet in my presence. It was a victory of a different kind. I watched her walk toward the exit, feeling a sense of closure. The war was over, and I had won without ever firing a shot. A few weeks later, things had settled down at the hotel. The repairs were finished, and the presidential suite was back in operation. I was sitting in my office when my secretary told me Diane was here to see me. I agreed to let her in. She sat down in the chair across from my desk, looking much older than she had a month ago. She didn't say anything for a long time. I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out a folder. Inside was a copy of the original incident report, the one with my signature and the true damage costs. I handed it to her privately. I didn't do it as a punishment or to brag. I did it as a statement of truth. "This is what happened, Diane," I said softly. "And this is who I am." She looked at the paper for a long time, her eyes filling with tears. She realized that I could have sent her husband to jail, but I had chosen to handle it internally instead. I had shown her mercy that she didn't deserve. She finally understood the weight of her actions. She looked up at me and nodded slowly. "Thank you," she whispered. It was the first honest thing she had ever said to me. We had a family brunch a few weeks later. It was a quiet affair, and everyone was a bit nervous. An aunt who didn't know the whole story tried to make a joke about the hotel disaster and how the plumbing was so bad. She started to laugh, expecting everyone to join in. But the room stayed silent. Diane was the one who interrupted her. "No," she said quietly, her voice steady. "That wasn't a plumbing disaster. That was the day we finally learned who Sloan Mercer really is." She looked at me across the table, and this time, her voice didn't carry any pride or sarcasm. It carried real understanding and a deep sense of respect. My parents-in-law were finally seeing me as a person, not a character in their stories. I realized something very important in that moment. I never actually needed revenge. I didn't need to destroy them to feel better. I just needed to stop being underestimated. I had reclaimed my name and my life. As we finished our meal, I felt a sense of peace that I had never known before. I was the CEO of my company, the owner of my story, and I was finally, truly seen. The incident report was closed, and so was that chapter of my life.